Welcome to BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. It's been a while since it's just been you and me here on the show. As we mentioned on Tuesday, if you missed the show, Greg is on vacation this week. So starting with just a bit of a programming note for this week, obviously it's just me, just Thomas Frank Carr on the podcast today. But I think we've got a good show. We got some fun topics, a lot of maybe even some new stuff that we're going to do today. We're also, the main topic today is going to be about path to the field for Penn State freshmen. And I'm including the 2024 class and the 2025 class because everyone loves the new shiny object, right? Everyone wants to unwrap their Christmas present and not wait 3 years for it, right? Like the number one questions we get are about guys with high recruiting profiles that haven't played yet or haven't seen the field just yet for one reason or another. You know all the names, you ask about them all the time. Cue the chat. We're going to talk about opportunity today, not the talent level, but what's the opportunity for those players with the talent to play to actually get on the field? Because it's not just that you're good or you have a high recruiting profile or a high ceiling or whatever. You have to actually have an opportunity and there not be 2 or 3 players better than you, older, more mature, more established, have more trust with the coaching staff ahead of you on the depth chart. So that's going to be what we're going to do, is examine the opportunity. And there is opportunity on this 2025 team, despite the fact that it is a preseason top 5 team. There are obvious places. We'll get to the obvious ones. We get to all say them together, kind of like church. Going to be later in the show when we talk about some of the positions where young players can make an impact. But tomorrow, so no Greg today, no wrestling show this week, but tomorrow, as a reminder, we have a 9 a.m. start time for the recruiting show. BWI Live at 10. That's tomorrow. It's at 9. That's because later in the day, James Franklin and the coaching staff are opening up the Lash building for the media. We're going to be there. We're going to have James Franklin's comments for you. So show up at 9. Maybe you just watch the replay live at 10 as you normally would. Love to have you here on the show. Want to have you here live. Want everybody here in the chat having a good time. But make sure you come back at about 12:30. I'm going to ballpark it. Maybe 12:35. Franklin usually speaks for about 15 minutes. I do my thing, and I get him on the internet for you. So that's coming up tomorrow around noon 30-ish if you want to hear James Franklin's press conferences from his June meeting. I like this. It's a little less in terms of, it's a summertime conversation with some of the coaches. It's a little bit more relaxed. They've done this the last couple of years, and it's a nice opportunity to catch up and kind of get in a midsummer update after spring camp is over. Lift for Life and all those other opportunities are still off in the distance. That's coming up tomorrow. Okay, so that's all of the scheduling things you need to know. Let's get into there's no news today. Let me just double check. Make sure I go to bluewhiteillustrated.com. Ooh, we actually have a new RPM from Fitz that went in, and you should probably go to bluewhiteillustrated.com for that particular information. What we're going to be talking about here to start the show is the preseason point spread. Had this up. Greg wrote about this. Wanted to include him on the show still, and this is a very Greg-centric thing. I don't have a whole lot to say necessarily about the point spread, but this is something we talked about on the last week's show where the first 3 were out. You can see Nevada, FIU, and Villanova, all near 50 in the point spread for Penn State. A 50-point favorite for the first, essentially, month of the season. After that, a home favorite against Oregon, and then I believe this says that they're a road favorite over Ohio State, which I find wild at this point. But essentially favored in every single game, if I'm reading this correctly. That's impressive. I think that speaks to the preseason objectivity that Penn State is actually good. Like this is where we get into, clearly this is way too early, right? We don't know what Nebraska is going to be like. We don't necessarily know what some of these situations are going to be towards the end of the season. So 20-point favorite for a November game virtually means nothing, but it does speak to the reality that Penn State is, even among the betting community, which don't have a fan-induced incentive here, think that this team is really good. And I don't want to make the comparison to 2017 necessarily. That's the last time I can remember they had an offense that could put up 60 points. Is really where my mind goes to there. When you say that they're nearly a 50-point favorite against some of those teams, I understand that says as much about the opponent as this says about them, but you've got to be able to score points. And so for Penn State, scoring points has been an issue the last 3 years or so, 4 years. I'm concerned. We'll get to some of those ideas later in the show because actually, no, we're going to get to it pretty soon because we're going to get into buy or sell, and it's going to take a lot of touchdowns to get there. It's going to take a lot of touchdowns to be a 50-point favorite to steamroll everybody in the first month of the season, be a favorite against Oregon. Say whatever you want about losing Dylan Gabriel. They have a former 5-star quarterback who's stepping into the starting role, and that offense is designed to score a lot of points. It's a spread offense, run, pass, take some deep shots. We'll get into what they are, who they have returning, all that stuff later in the summer. But at UCLA, a 22-point favorite. Just going to put some of these up here. These are some big spreads. So I'm super interested how this works out. And I was wrong. Ohio State is the favorite there. Basically a touchdown favorite. That's pretty close. Like if you say home field advantage is worth 3 points, so they're like a 2-point favorite at home. That's a pick'em game. So favored in all but one game in 2025. Wow. And a huge favorite, a bigger favorite at UCLA than at Iowa in week 8. Basically a 2-touchdown favorite at Iowa. Interesting. So there's your daily dose of like what I would consider news. Like I said, I want to keep Greg part of the show here to start. But let's get into buy or sell, because I want to talk about some of the aspects that will go into that particular conversation. Are they going to live up to that hype? So let's start with the defensive side of things. Let's start with the defensive side of things, and then we'll talk about maybe some of the other aspects of this. The first thing is passing yards per game. Penn State will allow fewer passing yards per game than last season. Buy or sell. They allowed 192.9 for those keeping track at home. Yards passing on defense. I believe that was 30th among college football defenses. Buy or sell. What do you think? In the chat, you can let me know. I'm going to go buy on this one. If there's one thing that Jim Knowles' defense does really well, I think, and I know there were some games last year where it didn't go very well with that in terms of giving up some explosive touchdowns to Oregon. This defense is designed to keep a lid on everything. They play 5 defensive backs, not just on the field, but in the secondary. They keep an extra safety deep at all times, along with a lot of off coverage, off man coverage, allowing the defenders to read and react. The problem is if you react the wrong way and you attack an underneath route and get double moved, suddenly, there you go, explosive play, but you should probably mitigate that with an extra safety on the field. So I do think that there is a big opportunity for Penn State to improve in the secondary, despite the fact that, the guys yesterday thought that the safeties will be worse and quarterbacks might you'll be better, but generally the defensive secondary, including linebackers, might take a step back than last year. Christian says fewer, less broken plays. Communication is a big part of that as well. I agree with that, Christian. Wobble says buy. Now the problem is coverage is only one half of this situation. Ryan says the front seven won't get the QB nearly as well as last year. So he's going sell that they're going to give up more than 192 yards a game, because as good as coverage is, coverage relies on the pass rush to not leave them out to dry, because nobody can cover for 8 seconds, right? If you let a quarterback scramble around and get players open later in the play, I think that's a legitimate concern. You do have denied Dennis Sutton, as we've talked about, and I think the mitigating factor for that could be Zane Durant. Yes, maybe there's not a defensive end number 2 that you think is going to be an ascendant pass rusher, but to me, you just need 3 threats on the field. And Ryan, I'm going to just give the devil's advocate situation here, because I don't think you're wrong, but football can play out in a bunch of different ways. It might not be win with 4 like they did last year. Tony Rojas is a good blitzer. They've got, I think Keon Wiley brings some of that to the table. If you can get 3 threats on the field, that allows you to get pressure because now somebody's probably going to have a one-on-one. I always looked at it in the NFL. If you got 2 edge rushers and 1 interior guy, or, in the college equivalent, a blitzing will linebacker is also a good option as a pass rusher. A nickel corner that can blitz, something like that. Adding in that extra element of getting somebody free when you have the attention going to somebody else. So Dennis Sutton should take that attention, and then Zane Durant should have a lot of one-on-ones. Now, if he starts getting double-teamed, you're sliding towards that side. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you've got Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant on one side. You slide that way. Now you got a linebacker blitzing for the backside. Maybe you add in some line games, and you can get pressure that way. But yeah, there is the opportunity for Penn State's pass rush to not be as effective because they don't have that number one guy, which they've had. We've seen it, by the way, where they've gotten good pressure, but not great pressure. And we've seen what Ryan's talking about in those situations. And I think that is a real possibility because Dennis Sutton needs to prove he's the guy. I'm going on my course correction tour for the month of June, where maybe before I was talking it down a little bit. Now I'm trying to talk up Dennis Sutton, talk about the fact that he's a good football player with the opportunity to be, a high second round, low first round draft pick. I think, he has to prove that he can be the guy, but he's got the tools to do it. So we're going to positively project that in June because it's June 4th. Why wouldn't you be positive at this point of the calendar? It's a good thing to do. Because, later you might not be as positive. Okay, so let's talk about this particular question. Buy or sell, Drew Allar throws 30 total touchdowns. Look at that. It is also the question of the day. So let's throw this in here as the question of the day for the BWI live show. You can answer in the chat. You can also answer in the replay, if you want to comment on the video. Do you think Drew Allar throws for 30 or more touchdowns this year? So that is the question. Buy or sell, Drew Allar throws 30 or more touchdowns in 2025. Because if we're talking about a team that can score enough points to win by 50 over Villanova, I understand the running game is going to be a huge part of that, but you need points on points on points to be that good, to be favored in every single game, to be a 20-point favorite on the road at UCLA. The running game can't do everything. And so that's the question. If you're watching the show on replay, reply to the video, comment below. Do you think Drew Allar can throw for 30 or more touchdowns? I am going to sell on this. And it's not that I don't think Drew could throw 30 touchdowns, but it's that I think the running game is going to get all the easy ones. So they get in the 5. Here's in the margins, right? He could throw for 25 touchdowns, and I think that's a great season. But you're at the 7-yard line. Are you going to run an option play? Maybe Luke Reynolds is your Wildcat quarterback or whatever, and Allar is not necessarily a part of that play. Maybe he even is. Maybe this year he is more of an option quarterback. He takes more of those plays. Maybe he runs for a couple more touchdowns. Throwing for 30 is hard. And I put the touchdowns here specifically because I don't think he's throwing for 3,000 yards in this season. The run game, the running backs are going to be all of it. They're going to be like the core and then the outer core and the crust, and then the mantle is going to be everything else, the passing game. Kind of the smooth veneer over top of what is the bedrock of this team, which is the run game and the offensive line at the tight ends. So I think it's possible that he throws for 30 touchdowns, but if we're saying buy or sell today, I don't know that that's going to be realistic given the options in the offense and what we know of this team and how they've been built. Run the ball and then options off the run. The passing game proper, I think, it's not secondary because it's essential to this team being what everyone wants them to be, but it is not necessarily going to be what you're calling up to get a touchdown, especially in the opportunity to score a touchdown. You have a much higher opportunity of scoring a touchdown inside the 20 than you do, from the 35. If there's one area where maybe they can improve, it's that high red zone, the 25 and in to about the 15, where it's maybe you don't have to beat on the door for 6 or 7 more plays and grind your way to a touchdown. Maybe you can just get a play action touchdown or kind of end the drive 6 plays early. That's in the high red zone where I think Drew Allar could stand to improve and where I think there's opportunity for him to improve. And that would prove me wrong here. So let's see who's got an answer for us here. I'm going to say, and I apologize because obviously I'm talking. I'm not seeing exactly when these are coming in. Yeah. Cyphered Carbon says 25 regular season touchdowns. Samesies. We arrived in the same spot. Yeah. Dusty Springfield Cat says definitely buy. Jay Swain says 17 games, 30 is relatively easy. Interesting point, because I don't think you want Penn State playing 17 games. That means they're playing in the championship game, then they lose, and then they have to play all the way through the playoff. Like, I know I'm quibbling about this. I think it's 16 if you don't play in that. How many games is it if you just win and get to the championship and win? If you went like undefeated, I think it's 16. There's just that one extra week. Or is there an opportunity for them to get a bye, but also not play in the championship game? Like skip 2 weeks? I don't know all the permutations because I didn't expect them to get a home playoff game and then face Boise State technically as the road team at any point. So all of this stuff is kind of dumb the way it's being done right now. Omni goes for 3,300 yards, 42 touchdowns, and 7 picks. Wow. So he's expecting Drew Allar to be the number 1 draft pick in 2026, to be the guy in college football. Because if he's throwing for that on this team, whoo! We also got a bye here. Let's see what else we got here. Barely, not much more is needed. So we're going more mixed than I expected. Jay Swain says, doesn't matter. 16, 17, he's saying it's easy to get 30 touchdowns. William asks the question, throwing for 30 touchdowns this season, who will catch 30 touchdown passes? Well, TBD, right? Stay here because that's going to be part of the show in just a minute. Now, we talked about the run game being a part of this conversation. We talked about the expectations for this team. Lots of veteran players, lots of talent returning for 2025. And I know I'm beating this comment to death, but it's stuck in my head. Buy or sell, Penn State will have more than one All-American on the roster in 2025. So more than one Penn State football player reaches an All-American team for this season. I'm going to go buy. Because I genuinely think this team has the opportunity to do what you want them to do, win big games, take steps forward for certain players. So one of the running backs should be an All-American. Is that ridiculous? Like the senior running backs, Nick Singleton, former 5-star, Katron Allen, IMG graduate, who's been a professional running back since he stepped on campus, has a full offseason to develop and get bigger, faster, and stronger. One of these guys in this situation being fed the ball so much, they're going to get so many stats. Like Wobble Wobble, I think last week we were talking about this, and he was kind of dumping on the idea of the receivers leading the team in passing yards. And while I think optimistically and ideally that would be the case, Nick Singleton could still catch 5 touchdowns and run for 14, right? Or some combination of that. He's been a passing game weapon the last couple of years. I think Katron Allen being a better athlete makes him also an opportunity to be a passing game threat more than he's been recently. He's been more of that guy that's the short yardage hammer, the guy you're going to give the ball to get critical yards. Singleton's been kind of a home run guy / athlete out of the backfield. If those two guys churn, like maybe they take away from each other, they eat into each other's votes, but one of them, these are the goals for seniors with first-round draft pick potential for Allar, Singleton, Dennis Sutton, maybe Zane Durant. Like I just think size is a problem. The NFL might not see him that way. But as far as a production player, he could absolutely be that, right? And then we get to A.J. Harris, which is the impetus of this particular question, where Terry Smith said that, he is an All-American candidate for this team. So you got that one in the secondary. You have maybe Dennis Sutton, if he puts together a season that he wants, coming back to prove he's a first-round draft pick, prove he's the next Abdul Carter that can be an All-American defensive end like Carter was. So I'm going 1 on offense, 1 on defense. I think the answer comfortably is 1.5. And that's what the question was to start. It was like 1.5. Then I realized we're not doing over-under. We're doing buy or sell, so it has to be a number. I don't think it's 1. It's either... The easy thing would be to say, 1 All-American. But I think 2 is reasonable. 1 on offense, 1 on defense. And I would put it at running back and then D end or corner, because I do think that in this particular defense, like we talked about, with the passing opportunities to get your hands on the football more because you're playing more off coverage and you're seeing things and reacting to them, I think A.J. Harris has the opportunity to get his hands on the football, make more impact plays rather than just being nose to nose, and have the opportunity for pass deflections. So stats lead to awards. There's no way around that. So one guy's getting stats, D end or corner. And yes, I think, Zakee Wheatley's in there as a safety. I think that's an option. But if we're talking about kind of the tentpole positions, I would say those 2, D end, corner, and then running back or quarterback. Like if he throws for 30 touchdowns, if Omni is right here in the chat and he goes 3,330 touchdowns, then Drew Allar should be an All-American because he probably won a bunch of games and he's going to have all the stats, the awards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's our buy or sell for today. And I'm interested to see what comes back in the replies to the video. Again, our question of the day for today is, will Drew Allar throw for 30 or more touchdowns in 2025? Let me know in the comments what you think. Okay, so our next thing we're going to be doing is discussing a path to the field. 2024, 2025, anybody who's got a freshman tag. So we're not talking about Dejon Lane. We're not talking about Cooper Cousins, who played enough last year that they are technically sophomores, right? They burned their red shirts, because I want to give the opportunity for some of these young guys from last year to have the opportunity to be in this conversation and not just go true freshmen, because in a lot of situations here, we're going to be talking about guys that might get leapfrogged. And I think that it's too narrow of a pool to say 2025 true freshmen who sees the field. I think you can incorporate some of those redshirt freshmen into this conversation, have a reasonable discussion about an underclassman, a young player, having the opportunity to see the field and carve out a role. This doesn't have to mean starter, right? I think that's, to be clear, when we talk about a path to the field and having a role on offense or defense, it doesn't have to be a guy that then assumes a starting role like Abdul Carter by week 5 of 2022. That's a super high threshold, and I want there to be room for conversation here, because I would say in that case, no, I don't see any freshmen starting in 2025. Now, here are 3. I wrote about this at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We're not going to go through the full list of places because there's a couple positions and some of those that we'll save for there, but we're going to do the most obvious ones. And let's just start with the most obvious of the obvious, which is wide receiver. And specifically outside wide receivers. This team really needs guys to step up outside of slot snaps for a couple of reasons. One, they're going to be a 12 personnel team. Like, they're going to play 2 tight ends a lot, so there won't be a slot receiver on the field unless they go, like an empty and they run 3 receivers, 2 tight ends. I don't know why you do that unless you had a running quarterback. But they also have a lot of these slot receivers. There's so many slot receivers on this team. Talked about this for a couple years now, and this is the problem. They had so many guys whose best opportunity was inside. But I would think even Anthony Ivy early in his career, if he wanted to see the field, was a better slot receiver than he was an outside receiver. But by necessity and need, he's been playing one of the outside roles this spring and last year. So you've got the opportunity after Traber Pena comes on to the team during the spring. And here's what I saw in terms of what happened with the roster this spring. So Penn State brings in Devontae Ross, Kyron Hudson, two guys that are going to play those outside spots. They're the starting receivers on this team. So when they go to 12 personnel, and, we're talking again about only two receivers on the field, those two guys are the starters. And then when you go to the three receiver set, there was an opportunity. There was a competition on the interior for those snaps. And that, to me, is when that didn't bear fruit, they went and got Trevor Pena. Now, it works out, and this is a bit of, using the conclusion as part of the logic, which is not sound for me to do, but it does make sense from a narrative perspective, so I'm running with it and shut up about it. They get Trevor Pena, and now that position is filled, right? So now they have technically three starting receivers, and everyone's got to compete for the positions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The coaching staff doesn't promise anything to anybody. Let's just make a reasonable expectation that a guy with over 1,000 yards receiving, I think, last year at Syracuse, or close to it, 900 and some, is going to be the starter, because I did not see anyone that had consistent production during the blue-white game or anything that, other than a couple flashes, was really what they wanted. They called for Tysier Denmark to be the guy, to step up and take that role. Then they go get Trevor Pena. Kind of tells me that didn't happen in the spring. That doesn't mean he can't play or contribute, but now that that's locked in, the major positions are, yes, some backup plays in the slot, but really outside. And the reason I'm taking a long wandering path around this, but here's what you need to know. Devontae Ross is going to see time in the slot. Luke Reynolds, Khalil Jenkins, they're going to take some slot reps as well. Trevor Pena is going to start there. Liam Clifford has been a slot receiver his whole career. Do you see the problem here? We got 5 or 6 right off the bat before we get to a freshman, Tysier Denmark, who would make sense to play there. So I think there's still an opportunity for Tysier Denmark to earn and carve out a role as a guy who occasionally sees time in the slot. But really what they need are guys to back up the starters on the outside. They need a 4th or a 5th receiver to take some snaps off those guys that they feel like they can trust outside. And that is where I think some of this competition that was happening in the spring, they were putting Kobe Howard in the slot. They were putting Tysier Denmark in the slot. Those guys can also play outside. I think now in training camp, we're going to see those guys more versatile than they were in the spring. That would be my bet, because you got to find some guys to back up at the X. If Kyron Hudson goes down, I don't know who plays X on this team. They'd obviously move some guys around. They'd just shuffle the starters around, but it's not a comfortable fit. So I know everyone is excited about Matt Otten. I think he's a little bit far away. Peter Gonzalez, my bad, I didn't mention him in the article. Obviously, if he's healthy, that's a guy who's got X body type and characteristics, who can play that spot. But Howard, Tysier Denmark, those are the two guys I think at the top of the list who are freshmen or redshirt freshmen that could contribute on this team at receiver, specifically outside. One of the things we saw during the blue-white game is I think the backup to the other receiver position, to the backup to Devontae Ross, is Liam Clifford. So he's the primary backup at every single position, but it is virtually impossible for him to actually be the backup at all these positions, because, again, if some dominoes fall and suddenly he's a starter, now you need an actual backup in these situations. So minimum one freshman has to be a part of this conversation. And I think the best possible fit, the best possible combination, which is how I think about things, is what's optimal, what is the optimization you can make, and then we filter down to what's realistic. Right now we're talking about and trying to design for best possible outcomes, outside wide receiver for one of these freshmen that can come in, and even if it's just a deep threat, right, a gadget player, somebody who carves a role on the offense, I think that's entirely reasonable. Now, gadgets, I'm not considering that in this particular conversation. I just talked myself into that point, though, because, yeah, if you've got a guy who's great at reverses, and we know Andy Kotelnicki likes his trick plays, there's definitely an opportunity for a freshman to be part of that trick play conversation, which leads us to our next position, running back 3. This is, by statistics, virtually guaranteed to go to a freshman or a player with freshman designation. I'm not ignoring Cam Wallace, but returning from the injury he was returning from and being in the spring, and he looked a little slow, a little rusty, he's going to have the opportunity to compete, but I mean, that's just a lot of time for him to miss. And that's a lot of rehab for him to go through. So that's where I'm looking at. You've got 4 freshmen here, right? And I'll throw in Jabri Wallace-Coleman, who's going to be a late add. I don't necessarily expect him to be part of the conversation, but Tyke Hayes is definitely part of the conversation. They'll, turn the corner, light come on, however you want to say. Once he's digested enough football where he's not thinking too much or overthinking things, then he's absolutely a player with the physical ability and the positional talent to be a part of this rotation to force his way into the lineup. And then you've got the 2 that everybody knows, Corey Smith, probably the most natural runner of the 3, who, if he gets big enough, can play. He showed some really strong running characteristics between the tackles, lowered the shoulder on Antoine Belgave's shoulder in the blue-white game, and then didn't break the tackle. Like, he gave an awesome truck stick effort and then fell forward for a yard. So, like, those are the realities of the situation. Same thing, by the way, for Quentin Martin. Exact same play with Kari Jackson, and didn't really break the tackle to get the extra yards that you're looking for when you're doing that Oklahoma drill stuff. So those are the 3 primary options, I think, that are going to see the field as this third running back. Now, the question here, to me, is does this result in taking Katron Allen and Nick Singleton off the field, or does it represent now we got 3 running backs on the field? They're going wildcat, and you've got Quentin Martin or Corey Smith doing some orbit motions or some wild nonsense along with Katron Allen and Nick Singleton in the backfield. Like, would they take Drew Allar off the field for a package like that? I think when we talk about Andy Kotelnicki's offense and some of the second iterations of this particular scheme, those are some of my kind of broader questions about where the offense could go. I'm not doing anything. I'm not creating anything that I didn't see on film already, right? Like at Kansas, when they were down to their 4th string quarterback, they just opted to not have the quarterback on the field. Reasonable thing. You've got a potential number 1 overall pick. Is it smart to take him off the field? Not really, which they showed they were unwilling to do last year. So I don't think that would change, but who knows? Like maybe there's an understanding of when we tried to force him into some of those. There were some plays last year where you had to establish the threat of Drew Allar being on the field in a gadget situation where somebody else is under center. Otherwise, the main problem with the Wildcat package is you are trying to create an even distribution 11-on-11 football, as James Franklin likes to talk about. When you've got a quarterback on the field that is not a threat to do anything, it's just 10-on-11 again. Except that the quarterback is not a threat to run. He's not a threat to throw. He's a threat to run. And so you had to establish a reason to keep an eye on Allar on those plays. If he's not, if they've decided it doesn't matter, like, that didn't really work, we're going to adapt and we're going to acknowledge that didn't pan out, then yeah, they might take him off the field for 5 snaps a game. I genuinely don't know how that's going to go. Beach Wine guys predicting some touchdowns here for the receiving unit. So I'm going to do some math here on live television. It's not great. So he's got Nick Singleton with 6 touchdowns, 2 receiving touchdowns for Katron Allen, and then we got 4 for Khalil Dinkins, 5 for Luke Reynolds, plus 1 for Andrew Rapplier. Kyron Hudson gets 5. Devontae Ross gets 6. Traber Pena gets 5. And the other receivers get 4. 38 touchdown passes for Penn State in 2025. I think that's a bit optimistic. if I'm being truthful, I think having Hudson, Ross, and Pena all getting 5+ touchdowns, and then the other wide receivers combining for 4. Like, they're having to, that's a lot of blowouts. That's a lot of explosive plays. So, I don't know about that. Eggman is saying, no, they're not going to use 3 receivers. They're going to use Smith and Martin during blowouts. I think that's fine. And by the way, that's an important thing I want to bring up. Thank you for mentioning that, Eggman. I'm not counting you get 4 games and then you can maintain your red shirt. I'm not counting you're just going to get in blowout games. Because we had this conversation about the offensive line and Egan Boyer. Egan Boyer is a redshirt freshman, very high on him. Are you actually rotating Egan Boyer into the game and removing Drew Shelton from the winning and the losing calculus of 14 games this year? I don't think that's a reality. Plus, they've got 3 tackles. They got 3 right tackles. They need to figure out what they're going to do with there. So I just don't see a role for a underclassman offensive lineman necessarily, guy who's been on campus for a year and a half, 2 years or less. So like, I wouldn't even count these 2 running backs. If they were to only see blowout garbage time, I'm not counting that as a role on the offense. I'm counting that as they got snaps because Penn State won 45-4 by the third quarter. And I know 4 isn't, I just threw that number out there. Terrible idea for a football podcast. How do you, 2 safeties? If you're winning 45-0 and they get 2 safeties, like that's not a good game script. That would also be a reason that Penn State fans would be super mad in the chat afterwards. 45-3. I don't know. This baseball season. I haven't watched any baseball this year. I don't know how 4 came out of my mouth. Okay, where am I? Totally derailed myself with that thought. Okay, so we got receivers, outside receiver, running back 3. Now, for defense, I'm just going to give you one of the particular positions that I think is important, and I'm going to narrow it down again. Specificity is my game. So, like, if you want to come here for broad things, like, I don't know how to do that. Vabu Torre. I will give you the specific player that I think has an opportunity as a freshman to see the field. Here's why. I don't know that there's anybody behind Zakee Wheatley that I would say can fill in for him in this defense from the depth chart I saw this spring. That's the concern. So where are you pulling his actual backup? Probably Dejan Lane, who's playing the strong safety position. And I'm using strong safety just as a shortcut for what I'm trying to say. So in that situation, his backup would need to see the field. That role in this, there are no easy safety roles. So let me just be clear. There are no easy safety roles. You have to understand run, pass. You can't bite on things and be out of position. You need to be the deepest of the deep. You need to be able to fill in the run game. However, if you have a role with 3 safeties that tailors one more towards the box than one towards the field and one towards, deep coverage, you can get a little more granular and specific. And you could have a couple of situations and a couple of plays where Vabu Torre is kind of just a box safety. And I don't want to limit him to just being that, but he's a really good football player. He hits like a truck. And if you've got a role where you just want him to be run defense and blitz and kind of fill extra gaps in the run game from deep, I think he can do that. And I don't think he's the athlete where you need to necessarily keep him out of coverage situations. You're not going to isolate him. You're not going to feature him in coverage situations just yet. But I think in specific zones, he could be fine. So he's a redshirt freshman who I think they need to see the field. So it's not just that he could, because the other option is the other safety position, the nickel safety position. So if you've got King Mack moonlighting between 2 safety positions to take some of the snaps off those 2 traditional guys in the backfield, and you have an obvious replacement for Zion Tracy to play, that's where you could pull from. But I really think you would want another safety, like a big physical box safety, to be a part of this rotation, ideally. So I'm just going to put Vabu Torre out there as if there is a freshman in that safety room who could make some plays, or a young guy that we haven't seen yet, by opportunity where things would work out best. I think you'd have Vabu Torre. And now that I'm saying it out loud, you have a redshirt freshman at that boundary safety position next to Dejan Lane, who's in that primary role. So you got 2 second-year safeties on the field at some point in this scenario that I'm talking up. And honestly, now that I've said it out loud, I don't believe that will ever happen. Like, I just don't see that happening. That's ridiculous. Two freshman safeties or 2 second-year safeties. I don't know about that. Z-Man, appreciate you. He says, T. Frank on a roll going solo. So here's the thing. we all have our strengths and weaknesses. I try very hard in these situations not to talk too fast because dead air is like, I'm terrified of dead air. So I'm glad that I'm not talking too fast. That's not to be like, hey, look at me, I'm great. That was more like, oh, good. I'm not talking 1,000 miles an hour because I'm afraid of a second of silence while I'm reading your comments. And by the way, apologize that we haven't gotten to as much of the comment section today because of that. We will here in just a second because we're getting to the BWI Mailbag. And I got a bunch of questions here that I've got from BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. But if you want to get your questions in the mailbag, appreciate you being here. So ask your questions. I'll do my best to roll through the chat. This is like a 17-second intro. I'm going to do my best to read as much as I can and then answer some of the ones that maybe you've thrown in here already. That went about as poorly as I expected. I read 3 things partially. So Omni is back. He, I don't know why. Maybe it's the logo that you got here. It just caught my attention. Also, there was a question mark in it, so that helped me out quite a bit. He says, Peter Gonzalez, will he factor into the wide receiver conversation on the outside? I would like to think so because he solves a lot of problems. I know I emphasize this a lot, but size is not unimportant, especially at receiver. Separation, the ability to create open windows for the quarterback is the number one thing we're talking about here. And I don't even know that maybe in this particular situation, Drew Allar doesn't like to throw jump balls a whole lot. So maybe I'm overemphasizing size. But listen, I'm like, at my heart, I like scouting. And when you've got a 6'2" receiver, I think he's 6'2", when you got a 6'2" receiver who is yet to fill out his frame and is going to be like 200 pounds versus a guy who's 5'11", 178. Like, I try not to be the EST syndrome of I need to find the biggest, fastest, tallest, strongest, all those things. But it does help when you got a guy, presumably at his best, who has no physical limitations in matchups with other guys, because there are 6'1" corners out there. There are physically strong corners out there. We've seen that be a problem. And I am absolutely overemphasizing because of what we've seen from Penn State, where they've had so much trouble with press coverage, and not even press, but just contact in the route. Big Ten corners like to maul you. The refs don't call these things. And there's, riding the line, there's being over the line, there's being the Joey Porter Jr. versus being the Ohio State guys that seem to be able to do it and not get called for it. So combating that particular problem is something that I think every Big Ten team has a problem with. It would just be helpful if your dude is as big as the other dude and can bench press as much as the other dude. That's, kind of where I'm coming from when it comes to the receiver conversation about size. Ultimately, dudes that can get open is the most important thing. Jesse Rogers looks like a dude that's just going to get open when he gets to school. He's not the biggest guy in the world. Jahan Dotson, I know, like all the examples, all of the counterfactuals. I know, like there's 100 of them. But it's helpful, right? Like it's just helpful. Okay, so let's talk about scouting. Let's talk about the next Abdul Carter. OC Lion wants to know what current defensive end has the potential and traits to be the next Abdul Carter in 2025. Is it Max Granville, Jalen Harvey, or is it Chaz Coleman? So none, zero in 2025. And specifically to the question of the timeline, none of these guys are going to be Abdul Carter in 2025 because Abdul Carter wasn't Abdul Carter in 2022. He was that 2 years later as a junior. So that expectation is I would say, over the top. And I don't know if that's specifically what OC Lion meant. Let's just say now, from that perspective, take a zoom out from just in their career, who has those combination of skills. We've done the, kind of comparisons before, the comps to Chop Robinson and to Max Granville. So I think those are two different players is what I'm trying to say too. Chop Robinson is fundamentally a different pass rusher to Abdul Carter. Now they have similar traits, but their impact in their, I would say like their complete profile, some of the length and size things, those are a little bit different. Body type, etc. So to me, I'm going to go with Chaz Coleman in this situation. And the problem is I don't have a good comp for Jalen Harvey. Like he's a thick-bodied 250, 6'2", really squatty guy that doesn't fit either profile. Because Abdul Carter was like a lean 250. Like again, he looked like a linebacker, played like a D end. So to me, it's Chaz Coleman. And I'm going to say this with respect to the fact that potential and upside are different than like what you actually become. And theoretical upside means nothing unless it's actually realized. But at 6'4", with a longer wingspan and a bigger frame, Chaz Coleman could be more than that. He could be it all. He could be the whole package. Because this athleticism is showing you here on his highlights. If you're listening on the podcast side of things, check out Chaz Coleman's highlights. Just go look them up, even if you don't watch them at this point in the video. This dude's a freak. Like he has a spin move that is based entirely off of his basketball skills that works, albeit at high school. But when I'm watching him, like, oh, that could translate. Like he could refine that and translate that. He's doing that on instinct, is what I'm saying. Most high school defensive ends don't think to use a spin move at all. The athleticism, the explosiveness, the frame, the fact that I think he could be 260-ish, 256. He's closer in body dimensions to deny Dennis Sutton than he is to Chop Robinson, right? And maybe he's that perfect point in the middle where he's not too big, he's not too small. He might be that guy as a pass rusher. So, I said at this point last year watching his film for the first time, if he can pick up the game from a mental perspective, these athletic traits you're seeing right now on the film, which were from last year, these could play in 2025. And we know he's closer to 245 now than he is 220, which is what he was playing last year. So if you want to answer to the question specifically in 2025, I'd say it's him or Ivan Kamaju, who's, again, another big-bodied, more physical guy. Maybe doesn't have the explosiveness or the wild athleticism of a Chaz Coleman. But I would say it's one of those two. And I don't mean to disrespect either of the other two. I think there's a different path for Max Granville, and I just don't have enough. I don't have a good feel for Jalen Harvey. Like just from you want a comp, you want all those things. I don't necessarily feel like I have a good idea of his full skill set because I think he could be a great run defender. Like look at his body type, dude could be a great run defender. And he's got the bend to rush the passer, but I know he was a really great prospect that they wanted. There was conversation at one point he could be a D tackle, right? So like that's I guess part of what's floating around in my brain of I don't know how that translates long term to what he's going to be. I don't think he's going to be a D tackle. That's not what I'm trying to say. But what's the profile of a guy that maybe flirted with playing on the inside at one point because he was so big as a high school player to then being a pure D end? I want to watch him play out a little bit, literally and figuratively watch this play out. We got a recruiting question next. This is from Scott L. How does Joey O'Brien potentially playing wide receiver at Penn State affect how many receivers Penn State takes this year, or does it have no effect? It would have no effect. That is, I think it would be an upset if Joey O'Brien was a true Travis Hunter two-way player. Here's part of the conversation around Travis Hunter that we're not talking about. Colorado needed him on both sides of the ball. They were not a good overall team. They needed to squeeze everything out of him. And obviously, Deion Sanders, who was a guy that played baseball and NFL cornerback in the same season, professionally played two sports at the same time. That's a guy who's going to be like, yeah, sure. Like, obviously, we're going to do that. I don't know that that is institutionally something Penn State is going to strongly consider. Now, does he have a package of plays? Does he have a red zone package because he's huge? He's a jump ball receiver. Does he have a couple of designed shot plays? Yeah, like I could see that for sure. I don't think he's going to be a full two-way player. Could be wrong. And I'm not doubting that he could do it, by the way, because The template is there. Now, the difference is Travis Hunter is like 180 pounds or something like that. Like, he is kind of an endurance athlete build. Joey O'Brien's 6'4". There's a big difference between the two body types. So he's just going to be lugging around 20 pounds more at his full size of being a safety and being a, maybe he plays corner, but I think we all project him kind of as a safety and being a receiver. On top of that, safety is a much more complex position than corner. So you got to be good at tendencies. You got to understand, but you're not in the run game as a corner. Like, you've got to keep contained, and every once in a while, you got to know that you got to fill the C gap. But teams are designing to run at you specifically because corners aren't involved in the run game. Safeties are involved in the run game. So Joey O'Brien would have a very complex job on one side and then would be a part of the offense in everything that means on the other. Now, Andy Kotelnicki's offense designed to be simple, right? Like, a couple of plays put into a blender of formations, shifts, and motions to come out with a bunch of effectively different plays based on all that extra, I don't want to call it nonsense, but all that extra on top of it. So maybe that's where that balance would be. And I'm just trying to work this out for you to say, like, what are the realistic options? Is obviously the other part is Andy Kotelnicki here if Penn State achieves what they want to in 2025 and they get to a college football championship game. So yeah, I don't think it affects anything. If they were to find another 5-star or borderline 5-star player like they have, or any of the targets they want to go get at receiver, yeah, I think they would add them in a heartbeat. It would not, if Joey O'Brien would not affect. I said this yesterday, David. He says all the extra window dressing. Yes, and I try really hard not to speak in cliches because it drives me crazy to hear other people speaking cliches. And like, I want I love variety in things, and I like words. I'm not good with them on the spot, obviously. I hope part of the charm of this show is that I fall on my face mid mixing of metaphors. But yeah, I could say all the window dressing. Anyone could say all the window dressing. That's easy. This show aims for a higher bar of nonsense. Okay, so I spent some time on this one. Greg K asked me a great question. What's your Matt Sieg comp? What's the projection? With all the talk of O'Brien, he seems to be flying under the radar. So kind of continue this conversation. This is a difficult one for me because Matt Sieg is a little bit different than some of the other prospects they've recruited recently. He is not a big safety according to Anthony Poindexter standards. He's 6 foot, 185 pounds. I don't think there's anything wrong with his frame. I think he's a good sized player. I didn't want to be easy and say Jalen Reed because 6 foot, maybe he's 200 pounds by the end of his career. Jalen Reed was around the football a lot more in high school. Sieg is an athlete. Ironically, I think his best skills, watching his full games, his most natural plays are all on the offensive side of the ball. Like, I think he could be a good gadget player for Andy Kotelnicki, guy who can throw the ball a little bit, runs the ball really well, great vision. If you were a receiver, this would be a great addition to the roster from the offensive side. I don't know that he's a great receiving prospect, but I went into kind of the numbers because I don't think the playing style fits anybody recently. So 6 foot, 184, athlete that runs in the 4.4s, really good athletic profile overall. Maybe not the most explosive, but explosive enough. Obviously, Penn State took him. I also think that despite what his highlights may show, I think he struggles to tackle. He struggles to wrap up a lot. And he does have kind of short arms, and he's not a box player naturally. He's also feeling a lot, at Fort Cherry, he's playing free safety. So maybe that's an unfair thing. If he was playing closer to the box, he'd have better tackling than when he's flying downhill. So I don't want to be too unfair about that. I think he could get there eventually, but I think he's more of a coverage safety. So it's not Zachy Wheatley. Zachy Wheatley is bigger, maybe not as fast. There's some instinct overlap you can see here of him going to get the deep ball. I like that, but Wheatley's a bigger frame overall. So I just went purely by size, and I went with Tyler Rudolph, who I don't know if that's the best comp in the world for him, but that was a coverage first player who had size, and Rudolph had a little bit better length and had a little bit more versatility to his game from that particular perspective. So I'm going to say Tyler Rudolph, and I don't like it. If you've got a better comp, the other one that came to mind, looking at all of the styles and the abilities, Jonathan Sutherland, great athlete, but Sutherland wasn't a good coverage player. It was kind of the mirror opposite, right? The mirror image, mirror opposite. Good job. I'm on a roll today, aren't I? So, yeah, I don't have a good comp as far as starters because I don't think he's Tig Brown. Don't think he's Jaquan Brisker. Now we're going way back. We're 2019 and before, and I just stopped looking. At that point, I just stopped looking for a guy that fit. Maybe Nick Scott. I don't know. Like Garrett Taylor, maybe. He was a name that I put out there, but I didn't really have time to go into the Wayback Machine and remember Garrett Taylor really well. I think Sieg's probably a better athlete from what I remember of Garrett Taylor as I'm pulling up those emotions in my head of his plays. Sieg might be a better athlete. Sig, by the way. I was watching a broadcast today, Matt Sig, and I've been calling him Sieg forever. So Matt Sig is how they called him on the broadcast to his face. So I think that's how you say his name. Okay, a couple minutes left here on the show. And I don't have anywhere to be. I can be a little bit long and I don't feel bad. I don't have the guilt of like, oh, I'm keeping somebody from doing their work here on the show, any of my co-hosts. But I keep it to an hour or so. Like by the way, if you're still listening to this show of an hour of just me talking, I love you. Thank you. God bless you. And by the way, like the video, subscribe to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Only 38 likes on the video so far, and we've got over 100 people here on the show. Please, it's super helpful. And I'll let you behind the curtain just a little bit before we answer this next question. I don't know if this is a surprise or not, but June and May are kind of dead. Like people realistically check out. Yesterday afternoon, I was out staining my deck because it's like rotten old wood. And I was like, I don't want to get people to get splinters on this. So I spent most of yesterday not on the internet talking about Penn State football, but outside in the afternoon. So I get like, you're out, you're on a boat, probably like something like, I just imagine it's May or June, you're on a boat. That's where everyone should be. Everyone should be in a pool, having some good time. So if you're here with me, you got to help me out a little bit more. And I know I ask all the time, but you look at some of the things this time of year versus during the fall, and it's a snooze fest from the interaction standpoint. So if you're here, this is my ask for you to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, although we've got a lot of people that have done that, and I really appreciate people being a part of that. Okay, that's my daily begging for likes and clicks. Let's get to the content that you're here for. Another really good question here from GMAC14. Having seen this offense at Kansas and other stops, if Andy Kotelnicki leaves after this year, will you be disappointed to have only had Drew Allar as his quarterback and not a QB who could incorporate all the schematic elements he wants to use? For this hypothetical, let's say Penn State doesn't win a national championship. I think that's fair, right? So like if Drew Allar were to win a national championship, it does not matter if he can run an option play or not. I have to like this is a great question. It's also, when you think about it for like a second, it's wildly unfair to say, hey, if Andy Kotelnicki had the perfect quarterback, if he had Lamar Jackson, would you be disappointed you didn't get to see Lamar Jackson run this offense? Yeah, I would, but also that's a super high bar, right? Because what I would not want, and this is my point, I would not want them to sacrifice the passing ability for the running element. I think the recruiting at Penn State has been quarterback first, athlete as much as we can get there. And then, the high upside guys that you see, the super athletes of the Peyton Falzones of the world, right? Those guys, if they hit, then you do have that, and great, like you found that. But I don't want to say like it has to be all of it or it's been disappointing. So no. My answer is no, just be on the fairness perspective. But yeah, it would be super dope to see all these things work out the way Andy Kotelnicki sees them in his head, right? So when you've got an option play and Drew Allar's looking at the defensive end crashing and he keeps the ball, and what you see is you could drive an SUV down the alley. If you had a guy that runs a 4.4, that is a 45-yard touchdown. But on the RPOs and on the drop back passing game, are you still getting those wide open windows? And I don't I would never want to sacrifice the opportunity to throw the football and bring balance to the offense that way. But if you had a guy that was a little closer to 50-50, maybe he's just a little bit worse of a passer and maybe a little bit better of a runner. Sure. Like I'll meet you in the middle of, it would be cool to see some of these elements pop off, right? But I think the overall net of Drew Allar in this offense is still I enjoy watching it. Especially considering the fact that you can do multiple things and there's different options within the offense of the drop back passing game and the option game and the RPO game and screens and all those things. You can do all of it, right? I would not want to lose that aspect with Drew Allar. So Z-Man says Trace McSorley. Is this traits, right? Traits, EST syndrome, and then McSorley. He never missed a deep ball, right? Like there are highlights of him chucking it deep and making big plays. And so to say like, but you're losing the deep ball when Drew Allar struggled to throw the deep ball consistently. Yeah. And Z-Man, he played in the NFL. Yes, he played in the NFL. But like, I go back and watch some of those plays, honestly, and the ball is getting there right before the DB. Like you see in the NFL, the RPMs. I mean, he played in the NFL, did not start in the NFL. Drew Allar can be drafted as a starter in the NFL. Now, important context here. He has to take advantage of all those tools and be that guy this year and make it like laughably easy for the passing game because he's dropping dimes all over the field. Otherwise, the answer is Trace McSorley. You got to bet on the upside, bet on the senior in that aspect. And I don't have an answer for you. So yeah, Trace McSorley. In this offense, Trace McSorley would be great. There's no doubt about that. And I just, it's always chasing the dragon, chasing the upside of a player that can do all those things. And yeah, final word here. Z-Man says he was balanced, best runner, and threw the ball well. No doubt about that. He saw the field exceptionally well and knew when to take risks, right? Knew when to fit the ball into certain areas and was a really good passer by his senior season. Okay, so last question here from the mailbag over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com that we're going to get to. Losey's mustache. Again, epic name. Anytime there's a question we can fit on the show, Losey's mustache is going to get the question on the show. James Franklin says that Drew Allar needs to throw to the receivers this summer. What exactly does that entail? Because it can't be organized team activity. Danny O'Brien or anyone else can't be there. What are the rules around off-season practices? So I am going to speak out of turn slightly. I believe, because I haven't read the rule myself, but I do believe they have 8 hours of instructional time with coaches and a football per week. I think it's 8 hours. So that leaves a lot of time that they can't, and that's really not a lot. So they can be with the strength staff. They can do all those things necessary in the offseason to build up their bodies, but they can't do practice. So the onus is then on the players to organize themselves, to do unorganized team activities, right? You obviously get the joke there. So Drew Allar is the leader of the offense, the leader of the passing game. He's got to know what we're doing, when we're doing it, who's going to be there, and be the leader, organizer of all those things. That is the quarterback leadership role. He knows the offense now in his second season. And so what they're doing is they're working on route timing. Okay, on this play, we're going to run this. If you get to this spot, I can get the ball to you against this zone. So you're running plays expecting certain outcomes, certain coverages, right? So specific plays can be designed to beat one particular coverage or a coverage family, or they can be designed because they work against everything. So it's working on the timing and the precision of these things where basically, those stories of throwing the route in the dark and they know where they're going to be and they can just catch it. That's the stuff they're doing in the offseason of working on the timing and the chemistry, right? And also, learning body language, understanding, those kind of like facial recognition or body language recognition or hand signals of like, hey, if we get this, we're just going to audible to a go ball, whatever it might be. Random examples. Learning your teammates to the point that communication can be done virtually telepathically. That's the goal in football, right? Defense and offense. So that's what they're working on. And that's what the passing game specifically is working on, is making sure they understand the verbiage of the play. And when you hear the play, you know where you're supposed to go and how you're supposed to go about doing that. So the timing and all that. So that is the full answer of what they're doing in the offseason. And I do believe, again, terms and conditions apply. I may be wrong about the number of hours, but I do believe they are allowed to have a limited number of hours of instruction with coaches and a football, but it boiled down to like 45 minutes or an hour a day maximum, not a practice, certainly. So yeah, there you go. Hopefully I get a, say Jay Swain, I think he says 1 hour of a day of actual running routes and making throws without coach input. Everything else they had to going on. That's a full day. Yeah, hopefully got that right. If not, I said I wasn't sure I was right about that. So let me see, just before we go, if there's one thing I can answer correctly with certainty, so I don't end on a question mark. Feels like a bad way to do it. But alas, everyone's just good in the chat. Like they know all the stuff. We got the regulars here. Here's one. Yeah. They want to know if I think this is Chaz Coleman is going to be the next 11. LeVar Arrington Jr. already has 11. That was bequeathed to him by the universe and his dad in Penn State football. So maybe eventually if LeVar Arrington Jr. is somehow, but they're in the same class. So that would be difficult for that to go from one to the other than for maybe a year. And at that point, you probably want to find the next 11 for Penn State, some guy in the class of 2029, 2030. That was the thing. This weekend, I was scouting 28 and 29 players because, it's a little bit easier to pick out the dude who's 15 and already the size of a 17-year-old and go, hey, I bet he can play football. Yeah, I bet he could play football. So we're going to be doing more of that this weekend, by the way. So there's 7-on-7 tournaments. There's camps all summer long for June. So don't go anywhere because the recruiting show is going to be stock full of information. The Wednesday show, we might even get to some of my thoughts about the camps and things like that. And of course, tomorrow, 9 a.m. Remind you out the door, 9 a.m. start time for the BWI live show. I've also got to tell my coworkers, make sure they remember that. And then James Franklin around 12:30 on Thursday. All right. We'll talk to you then. See you.